Welcome to episode 36 of the Ulysses Unlocked podcast, where we analyze Ulysses by James Joyce one page at a time. Don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe, and leave a comment to support us. So imagine for a moment that you are walking down the street on a really crisp morning.
Just a normal chilly morning commute.
Right, exactly. And you are daydreaming about this radiant, exotic sun rising over the Middle East. It's, this beautiful, warming image, a perfect escape from the chill of your actual reality.
It's a nice thought.
It is. But now imagine realizing that the sun you are picturing is supposedly on the title page of a book you own, but, well, that specific page was ripped out of your copy years ago.
Oh, wow. So it's not even there.
Nope, the sun doesn't exist. Your brain is entirely manufacturing the warmth it so desperately craves.
That is just, it's a striking realization about how consciousness functions, really. And it is exactly the kind of psychological terrain we are navigating today in this deep dive.
Yeah, today we are following Leopold Bloom right out the front door of 7 Eccles Street. We are continuing our journey through the Calypso episode, basically trailing him on his morning walk down Dorset Street in 1904 Dublin.
Right, getting right into his head.
Exactly. Over the course of this deep dive, you and I are going to track his thoughts as they swing from those fabricated exotic fantasies to the gritty, highly strategic economics of Dublin's pub culture.
Which is a huge shift.
Massive shift. And we will step inside a symbolically loaded butcher shop, uncover some of his deepest, darkest voyeuristic secrets. And ultimately, we are going to examine a genuinely groundbreaking stylistic trick James Joyce uses to describe the autonomy of the human body.
It's an incredibly dense sequence. A simple walk to the shops in this novel is never just a simple walk.
Well, never.
It is a full diagnostic of the human condition.
It really is. But before we step out onto the pavement with Bloom, I need to establish a vital clarification about his actual errand.
Oh, right, the meat.
Yes. Because if you are reading the text closely, you will see Bloom spend a considerable amount of time standing in a butcher shop staring hungrily at these hanks of sausages.
Right, he's totally mesmerized by them.
He is completely transfixed by these mottled polonies. The text dwells on them so heavily that you might assume that is what he left the house to get. But we need to keep in mind that his actual mission, the item he explicitly desires, leaves the house for, and successfully purchases, is a pork kidney for his breakfast.
Sausages are just a profound sensory distraction.
Exactly.
Which is a perfect metaphor for the way his mind works. The kidney is the pragmatic goal, right? But the sausages represent the aesthetic and sensory detours that his consciousness constantly takes.
That's a great way to put it. So let's follow that consciousness out into the morning light. Our narrative begins with Bloom walking in the sun, and his mind immediately goes to the east.
Right, to the Orient.
Yeah, he is imagining walking ahead of the sun, somewhere in the Middle East, basically stealing a march on the dawn so he never technically ages. It is a beautiful, almost cinematic fantasy.
It really is.
But, in reading through the background materials, I found that this isn't just a random flight of fancy. This fantasy is anchored to a very specific object sitting on his bookshelf back at Eccles Street.
Yeah, the anchor is a physical book. It's a travelogue titled In the Track of the Sun, Readings from the Diary of a Globetrotter.
Which was real, right?
Oh, completely real. It was a genuine publication from 1893, written by a man named Frederick Diodati Thompson.
Okay.
And Thompson was this wealthy American who did exactly what the title suggests. He traveled overland from New York to British Columbia, sailed across the Pacific to Japan and China, down through Ceylon and India, across to Egypt, and finally into Palestine.
Wow, quite the trip.
Yeah, and the book was bound in this very distinctive yellow cloth.
Right, and it is that final leg of Thompson's journey, Palestine and the Middle East, that has completely hijacked Bloom's imagination this morning. As he walks along Dorset Street, the text notes that he explicitly thinks about the sunburst on the title page of this travelogue.
Right, he smiles at the thought of it.
He does. But if we look forward to the Ithaca episode of Ulysses, which, comes much later in the book, and acts as this intensely logical, objective inventory of Bloom's entire life and possessions.
Right, the famous catalog episode.
Exactly. In that episode, we get a detailed forensic description of Bloom's copy of In the Track of the Sun. And the inventory explicitly states that Bloom's copy has a, quote, title page missing.
Which fundamentally alters our entire understanding of his daydream.
It changes everything.
It really does. Bloom is not remembering a visual fact. He is engaging in an act of profound psychological projection.
Right.
And even more ironically, if you look at a pristine historical copy of Thompson's book, the actual title page didn't even feature a sunburst.
Wait, really?
No. It featured photographs of a great Buddha statue and a Japanese musician. So Bloom's memory is entirely fabricated on multiple levels.
He is projecting a brilliant, warming sun onto a total void. I think it tells us so much about his emotional state this morning, you know?
Oh, absolutely.
He is a man yearning for warmth, for the exotic, for an escape from the incredibly local, parochial reality of Dublin. But what I find so brilliant about Joyce's mapping of the mind here is how quickly that lofty, exotic fantasy collapses under the weight of his immediate environment.
And he doesn't get to stay in the Middle East for long.
Not at all. The abstract image of the sunburst immediately snaps his mind back to a highly specific, local political joke made by the Irish patriot Arthur Griffith.
Right, and this is where we see the political architecture of 1904 Dublin intrude on his private thoughts.
Right, the real world creeping in.
Exactly. Arthur Griffith was a major figure in advanced Irish nationalism. He was a journalist who founded the United Irishman newspaper and later the political movement Sinn Féin. And in the text, Bloom recalls Griffith making a very sharp geographical joke about the masthead of the Freeman's Journal.
Which was the dominant daily morning newspaper in Dublin at the time, right?
Yes, exactly.
And from what I read, it was a pro-home rule paper, meaning it supported the idea of an Irish parliament managing domestic affairs, but it was generally viewed as moderate or even conservative.
That's right. The militant advanced nationalists like Griffith found it frustratingly cautious and establishment-aligned.
Okay, so the Freeman's Journal had this grand symbolic illustration on its masthead. It depicted a glorious sunburst rising over the Bank of Ireland building, accompanied by the bold motto, Ireland, a nation.
Very subtle.
Right. And the symbolism was obvious to any Dubliner. The Bank of Ireland, located on College Green, occupied the exact building that had formerly housed the independent Irish Parliament before the Act of Union in 1800.
Right, which dissolved that parliament and absorbed Ireland directly into the United Kingdom.
So by putting a rising sun behind that specific building, the newspaper is broadcasting this hopeful message about the dawn of a new era of Irish legislative independence. It is a very earnest, slightly pompous piece of political branding.
It is. But Arthur Griffith, utilizing his sharp critical eye, looked past the earnest symbolism and focused on the literal geography of Dublin.
Oh, I love this part.
Yeah, Griffith pointed out that given the actual physical orientation of the Bank of Ireland building on College Green, for a sun to be rising from that specific angle behind the bank, it would have to be rising in the northwest.
Okay, let's unpack this. That is astronomically impossible. The sun rises in the east.
Precisely. Griffith used a literal geographical impossibility to mock the newspaper's political stance.
That is so petty and brilliant.
It is. He was essentially telling the public that the moderate conservative brand of home rule championed by the Freeman's Journal was as unnatural, impossible, and absurd as the sun rising in the northwest.
Wow.
It is a devastatingly clever piece of political satire because it uses the city's own geography to dismantle a political rival.
The associative leaps here are just staggering. I mean, Bloom sees the actual sun, imagines a fake sunburst in a book about the East, which reminds him of a fake sunburst on a newspaper, which reminds him of a joke about the political impossibility of Irish independence.
It's quite a chain reaction.
It perfectly mirrors how our own minds work today. You might see an advertisement for a vacation in Bali on your phone, and the image of the beach reminds you of a local political scandal involving coastal zoning laws, and suddenly you are mentally arguing with your mayor while you wait for your coffee.
Exactly. Joyce is mapping the hyper-associative, hyper-distracted reality of human thought.
And that associative logic dictates his movement through the city, right?
Yeah, the sunlit street physically leads him to the corner of Eccles Street and Dorset Street, bringing him directly to the doorstep of Larry O'Rourke's pub.
So the abstract political sun gives way to the very visceral sensory reality of the Dublin drink trade.
And the sensory details Joyce deploys here are incredibly vivid.
Oh, totally. As Bloom approaches, we get the smell of the place before we even see the people.
Right.
From the cellar grating floats up the, quote, flabby gush of porter. Through the open doors, the bar squirts out whiffs of ginger, tea dust, biscuit mush. You can practically smell the stale, sweet, yeasty, slightly suffocating air of a 1904 Dublin morning.
It really establishes the pub not just as a social hub, but as an inescapable atmospheric presence in the city.
Yeah.
And Bloom, looking over the window blind, spots the proprietor, Larry O'Rourke. He describes him as a cute old codger.
Cute.
Well, with cute being used in the traditional Irish sense of shrewd, cunning, or clever.
Ah, got it. Not adorable.
No, definitely not. Larry is casually leaning against a sugar bin in his shirt sleeves, but he is keeping a very watchful eye on his employee.
Right, and Bloom refers to the employee as the, quote, aproned curate, swabbing up with mop and bucket.
That word curate is so loaded here.
I want to pause on that word because it reveals so much about the intersection of religion and alcohol in Irish culture. A curate in the Catholic Church is a clergyman who assists a parish priest, specifically tasked with the care of souls.
Right.
But in the pubs of Joyce's Dublin, a curate was the ubiquitous slang term for a bartender.
It is a deeply ingrained, almost cynical cultural pun. I mean, the analogy is stark. The pub is the alternative church.
Wow, yeah.
The bartender is the priest, serving spirits rather than the Holy Spirit.
That's brilliant.
You pay your dues as a lowly assistant, faithfully serving the mother institution, and if you are diligent, obedient, and perhaps a little ruthless, you might eventually rise to command your own parish, or in this case, own your own pub.
And it's that specific upward mobility that captures Bloom's attention. He watches this young guy mopping the floor and begins to ponder the entire life cycle of a Dublin publican.
He's doing the math in his head.
Exactly. He knows these massive establishments generate immense wealth, and he wonders where the initial capital comes from.
Right.
He imagines these publicans starting out as young men from the rural provinces.
Right.
He thinks about them coming up, quote, red-headed curates from the county Leitrim. And I should make a critical note here for you listening on pronunciation if you are discussing this geography. The county is pronounced Leitrim in Ireland.
Yes, Leitrim. It's vital to get that right.
Absolutely.
And County Leitrim, situated in the northern part of the province of Connacht, is crucial to Bloom's mental image here.
Oh, so?
Well, it had the smallest population of any Irish county. And in 1904, it was intensely rural and economically disadvantaged. From the perspective of a metropolitan Dubliner like Bloom, Leitrim represented the agrarian fringe.
Oh, I see.
The young men who migrated from there to the city were generally regarded by Dubliners as naive country bumpkins.
Right. So Bloom pictures these naive kids arriving in the capital and starting at the absolute bottom of the hierarchy. They are rinsing empties and saving the old man in the cellar.
The old man being the slang for the leftover beer slops that collect in the drip trays under the taps or the dregs left in a customer's glass.
Disgusting.
Very. These young curates are doing the miserable, unglamorous work of managing stale beer.
Yet Bloom notes that from these incredibly humble beginnings, quote, lo and behold, they blossom out as Adam Finlaters or Dan Tallons.
And the inclusion of those two specific names, Adam Finlater and Dan Tallon, is entirely deliberate on Joyce's part.
They weren't just random guys.
No, they are not random wealthy men at all. They are the dual avatars of Dublin's divided mercantile soul. They represent the absolute zenith of social, political, and economic mobility that the grocery and pub trade could offer.
Okay, let's look at Adam Finlater first. He represents the Protestant establishment wealth.
Right.
He was the managing director of Alexander Finlater and Company, a massive grocery, wine, and spirit enterprise founded by his Scottish immigrant father. They weren't just running a corner pub, they had branches all over the city and the affluent suburbs like Blackrock, Kingstown, and Bray.
Finlater was an empire builder, plain and simple, and politically he was a prominent liberal unionist. He favored maintaining the political union with Great Britain.
Which probably made him a target.
Oh, definitely. This made him a frequent target for nationalists like Arthur Griffith, whose newspaper viciously criticized Finlater, branding him a West Briton and accusing him of groveling to the English establishment in the desperate hope of securing a knighthood.
So Finlater represents wealth aligned with the imperial center.
Exactly.
Then you have Dan Tallon, who represents the other side of the coin. Tallon was Catholic, deeply nationalist, and equally wealthy.
You're very wealthy.
He was a highly successful grocer and wine merchant, but his real power was political. He served as the Lord Mayor of Dublin for 3 consecutive terms right at the end of the 19th century, which was an unprecedented stretch of power.
Tallon was a political juggernaut. He raised funds in the United States for nationalist monuments, but he was also the unapologetic face of the formidable drink lobby.
Which I'm sure the temperance movement loved.
Oh, they despise him. D.P. Moran, a fierce Irish cultural critic, mocked Tallon as the keeper of the magic button.
The magic button.
Yeah, Tallon notoriously boasted that as the spokesman for the drink trade, he only had to push a button and the Irish Parliamentary Party leadership would immediately respond to his demands.
Wow. So when Bloom looks at the young guy swabbing the floor in Larry O'Rourke's pub, he isn't just looking at a janitor, he is looking at the first rung of a ladder that leads straight to the mayor's office or to massive corporate wealth.
Right, he's looking at the engine of the city's power structure.
But Bloom is a pragmatist, and he is highly suspicious of the mechanics of that ascent. He calculates the margins of the pub trade in his head, and he assumes there must be illicit activity involved to bridge the gap between mopping floors and becoming a millionaire.
He theorizes a specific white-collar crime. He thinks, quote, on the wholesale orders perhaps, doing a double shuffle with the town travelers. Square at you with the boss, and we'll split the job, see?
The double shuffle is such an evocative phrase. Literally, it's a step in a hornpipe dance where you shuffle both feet twice.
Right.
But here, Bloom is using it as slang for a scam or a kickback scheme. He imagines the town travelers, the traveling salesmen, representing the big breweries and distilleries colluding with the ambitious young pub managers.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the mechanism of the scam is straightforward but insidious.
How does it work?
The manager agrees to let the traveling salesman overcharge the pub owner on the wholesale invoice for a large order of porter or whiskey. The pub owner, trusting his manager, pays the inflated bill.
And then
the manager and the salesman then secretly split the illicit extra profit between them. It is a slow, systemic siphoning of wealth from the owner to the ambitious underling.
I initially read this and thought, is Bloom just being a paranoid conspiracy theorist? Throughout the novel, he constantly suspects people of hidden agendas or financial trickery.
Right, he can seem a bit cynical.
But the more you look at his internal monologue, you realize he isn't a cynic. He is just intensely literate in the realities of 1904 capitalism.
Absolutely.
He understands that in a fiercely competitive, low-margin business environment, survival and advancement often rely on creative corruption. He respects the hustle, even if he doesn't participate in it.
He is constantly calculating the economics of his environment. He sees the city not just as a collection of buildings, but as a complex web of financial transactions, margins, and profit mechanics.
Yeah.
And it's this exact fixation on the sheer scale of the pub industry that leads him to formulate one of the most famous thoughts in the entire novel. He thinks, quote, good puzzle would be cross Dublin without passing a pub.
Which is such an incredible observation about the suffocating density of licensed premises in the city.
It really is.
And what I love is that this wasn't just a throwaway line of dialogue, it became an actual obsession for readers. For decades, Joycians and puzzle enthusiasts would get out physical maps of Dublin and trace exhaustive routes, trying to figure out if it was mathematically possible to walk across the city without passing a pub.
And for nearly a century, the sheer density of bars defeated everyone.
Everyone. The city's geography was fundamentally built around the distribution of alcohol. It seemed an impossible challenge.
Until quite recently, right?
Yes, until 2011. A software developer named Rory McCann decided to tackle Bloom's puzzle using modern technology. He built a computer algorithm.
Of course.
He mapped the borders of Dublin along the Royal Canal and the Grand Canal, and he inputted the precise geographical coordinates of over 1,000 pubs.
That's dedication.
And then, and this is the brilliantly rigorous part, he programmed a 35-meter exclusion zone around the front door of every single pub. The algorithm had to find a continuous path across the city without ever breaching one of those zones.
It is a fascinating collision of early 20th century modernist literature and 21st century spatial computing.
So cool. And after running the algorithm and making several tweaks based on locals emailing him about obscure, hidden pubs the database missed, the computer actually found a solution.
Oh, wow. It did?
It did. It plotted a single, highly convoluted, viable route from the northwest to the southeast of the city that successfully dodged every single exclusion zone.
That's amazing.
Though, in a stroke of absolute irony that Joyce would have adored, the only way the route worked was by forcing the pedestrian to walk directly past the massive Guinness brewery at St. James's Gate.
You're kidding.
Nope. You could avoid the pubs, but you still had to walk past the source of the beer.
Bloom would have deeply appreciated the irony of that solution.
He definitely would have. So the pub represents the endpoint of a certain kind of Dublin ambition, but Bloom's walk immediately brings him face to face with where that ambition is supposed to begin. As he leaves Larry O'Rourke's behind and continues down Dorset Street, the sound of children's voices pulls his mind away from adult economics and into the realm of education. He passes St. Joseph's National School, and through the open windows, he hears the brats' clamor.
The children are reciting the alphabet in a unified sing-song chant.
Yeah. And the physical location here is specific, right?
It is 81 to 84 Dorset Street Upper. But to understand Bloom's reaction, we have to look at the institution itself. In Ireland, the national schools were the equivalent of state-funded public primary education.
Okay.
However, they were established by the British administration and functioned largely as utilitarian vocational schools aimed at the working and lower middle classes.
And they were the site of immense cultural friction, from what I read.
Deeply so. The curriculum and the administration of the national schools were heavily criticized for having an English Protestant bias. They were widely perceived by Irish Catholics, not just as educational institutions, but as engines of assimilation designed to mold Irish children into compliant subjects of the British imperial system. There was a deliberate effort to suppress the Irish language and indigenous history in favor of British geography and history.
It's basically a subtle form of psychological colonization.
Precisely.
Yet Bloom's immediate memory of school isn't overtly political, it's visceral and rhythmic. Hearing the children chant the alphabet reminds him of the mnemonic tricks used to drill facts into young minds.
Like songs and rhymes.
Yeah, he recalls the word geography, which was the contemporary schoolyard slang for geography, basically a childish mangling of the word, and his mind immediately unspools a specific geographic chant. Inishturk, Inishark, Inishboffin.
He is recalling 3 very real, ruggedly isolated islands located in the Atlantic Ocean off the west coast of Ireland.
Where
Specifically off a remote area in County Galway, known historically as Joyce's country. In 1904, these islands were sparsely populated and incredibly difficult to reach, accessible only by fishing boat in treacherous weather.
Which raises the question, why are children in a metropolitan Dublin school being forced to memorize the names of 3 tiny remote islands on the absolute fringe of the country?
It's a great question. And it's because in the national imagination of the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the remote western islands were romanticized as the last pure bastions of authentic, ancient Irishness, completely untainted by English influence.
Ah, so they held an outsized mythological importance.
Exactly. Furthermore, the names themselves are steeped in agrarian meaning. Inish derives from the Irish word Inis, meaning island. Inishturk translates to the boar's island. Inishark is the ox's island. And Inishbofin is the island of the white cow.
I see. What I find so telling is that Joyce doesn't have Bloom list the islands in their actual north-to-south geographical order.
Oh, he doesn't.
No, he lists them according to their rhythmic, poetic sequence. Inishturk, Inishark, Inishboffin. He remembers the music of the lesson, the way the syllables bounce off each other. The rhythm is the mechanism of the memory.
That's a great point. It highlights how education at that level was largely a matter of rote, physical memorization, rather than any actual critical understanding.
Right.
The children were essentially trained to be vocal instruments.
But Bloom doesn't stop with the islands on the coast. His mind sweeps inward across the map of the country, and he thinks, mine, Sleeve Bloom. He is thinking of the Sleeve Bloom Mountains.
Right in the center.
Yeah. And I originally thought, isn't it a bit pathetic that he has to claim a geographical feature just because it shares his name? I mean, he has no real social standing, he's culturally marginalized, so he has to cling to a pun on a map.
I would actually argue against viewing it as pathetic.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I think it is a moment of quiet, profound dignity. The Sleeve Bloom Mountains, with Slieve being the Irish word for mountain, are a gentle, ancient range in the very center of Ireland. They are geographically central to the island.
So you see it as him anchoring himself?
Absolutely. Leopold Bloom is a Jewish man of Hungarian descent. He is constantly made to feel like a perennial outsider, a stranger, by the more militant nationalist citizens of Dublin who define Irishness in strictly Catholic, insular terms.
Right.
Yet, in the privacy of his own mind, he takes this immense delight in realizing that a mountain range resting in the very bedrock, the geographic heart of the Irish landscape, bears his name.
He claims the earth, and the earth claims him.
Yes. It is a synthesis of personal identity and national belonging that totally bypasses the toxic politics of his peers.
That is a beautiful way to read it. He is grounding his identity in the geology of the country rather than its volatile politics. But his geographic wanderings are suddenly physically halted.
He's arrived.
He has arrived at his destination. He is standing on the pavement in front of the window of the pork butcher's shop, staring at the meat. And this specific shop introduces a massive layer of historical irony and blatant biographical intervention by James Joyce.
Right, we have to look closely at the name above the door here. The text states the shop belongs to a man named Dlugacz.
And to understand the irony, we have to look at the historical reality of Dorset Street in 1904. I looked up the historical directories for 1904 Dublin, and there was no Dlugacz on Dorset Street.
Not at all.
The only pork butcher located on Dorset Street Upper, operating out of number 55A, was an ordinary, presumably Catholic Irishman named Michael Brunton.
So Joyce takes a real historical space, erases the actual proprietor, and inserts a fictional butcher named Moses Dlugacz.
Why does he do this?
Because James Joyce utilized Ulysses not just as a novel, but as a repository for inside jokes, personal scores, and profound thematic ironies. Moses Dlugacz was not a fictional invention out of thin air. He was a real person, but he had absolutely nothing to do with Dublin. Dlugacz lived in Trieste, Italy, which was the vibrant, cosmopolitan port city where Joyce spent many years in self-imposed exile.
And what was Dlugacz's background?
He was a brilliant intellectual, an ardent Zionist, and one of Joyce's English language students at the Berlitz School in Trieste.
Okay.
More importantly, he was Jewish. He was the son and grandson of Ukrainian rabbis, and he had been ordained as a rabbi himself at a remarkably young age before turning to secular Zionism.
So Joyce takes this devoutly Jewish rabbinical scholar, this passionate Zionist from Italy, teleports him to Dublin, and makes him the proprietor of a pork butcher shop.
Yes.
The irony is completely staggering. Jewish dietary laws, the rules of kashrut, strictly forbid the consumption of pork, let alone the handling, processing, and selling of it.
It is an incredibly bold, almost absurd practical joke Joyce is playing on his former student.
But it is a joke that serves a deep thematic purpose, I assume.
Oh, totally. By placing a Jewish man in the role of a pork butcher, Joyce is amplifying the themes of exile, assimilation, and the complex, often contradictory realities of modern Jewish identity in Europe. It forces us to confront the compromises people make to survive in foreign environments.
And it sets the stage for a highly charged, unspoken interaction. Bloom walks into the shop, breathing in the heavy, lukewarm breath of cooked, spicy pig's blood. He steps up to the counter and orders his pork kidney from this man.
Right.
And during the transaction, Bloom infers that the butcher is Jewish. The text simply says he thinks, quote, "I thought he was." And when Bloom hands over the money, there is a sudden moment of mutual recognition.
The text describes the visual exchange beautifully. A speck of eager fire from Fox Eyes thanked him.
Fox Eye.
Yeah, they lock eyes over the bloody counter. Dlugacz recognizes that Bloom, despite purchasing non-kosher organ meat, shares his Jewish heritage. Dlugacz's eyes show an eager fire. He wants to connect.
He wants to speak, to establish a bond of camaraderie in this lonely city. But Bloom immediately shuts the connection down. He sees the eagerness in the butcher's eyes, and his internal monologue snaps. No, better not, another time. He actively withdraws his gaze.
He pulls right back.
Yeah, and when I first read this, I interpreted it as deep internalized shame. I thought Bloom was embarrassed to be caught essentially violating his heritage by buying a pork kidney, and he didn't want to face the judgment or the awkwardness of the shared acknowledgement.
Well, I understand that reading, but I think the reality of Bloom's character points in a different direction entirely.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it isn't shame, it is a profound weariness and a complete rejection of ideological fervor. We know from biographical notes that the real Moses Dlugacz in Trieste was notoriously intense. He constantly tried to win people over to the Zionist cause, lecturing them passionately. Joyce famously told a friend, "I dislike all enthusiasms," and he clearly imparted that exact trait to Leopold Bloom.
So you're saying Bloom is just trying to avoid a lecture?
Essentially, yes. Bloom is deeply empathetic, but he's incredibly wary of being recruited into any movement, be it Irish nationalism or Zionism.
Right.
He feels the pull of his ancestry, but he is fundamentally a secular pragmatist living a modern life. He doesn't want to be proselytized to while he's buying his breakfast. He embraces his isolation because it affords him intellectual freedom. He just wants to get his kidney and go home.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. He is protecting his peace. But here is where the scene pivots, because while this subtle, high-stakes religious and ethnic tension is evaporating at the counter, Bloom's conscious attention has been completely hijacked by a totally different presence in the shop.
He becomes entirely fixated on the woman standing in line ahead of him.
He identifies her immediately as the next-door girl. She is the domestic servant who works for his neighbor, Mr. Woods, who resides at 8 Eccles Street, right next door to Bloom's own home at number 7.
Right.
And this seemingly mundane encounter opens up a massive window into Bloom's deeply complex, highly voyeuristic, and often uncomfortable psychology.
We see his mind operate as an intense deductive machine. As he watches her, he pieces together a narrative about her life and the domestic dynamics of his neighbor's household.
What does he think?
He thinks, wife is oldish, new blood, no followers allowed.
Okay, let's break down that rapid-fire deduction. No followers allowed was a standard employment condition for domestic servants in Dublin at the time, right?
Yes, very common.
It basically meant the maid was strictly forbidden from entertaining boyfriends or male suitors at the house. Employers claimed it was to prevent distractions, maintain propriety, or deter potential theft by outside men.
But Bloom, viewing the world through a highly sexualized lens, interprets this standard rule as something far more predatory.
Oh.
He assumes that his neighbor, Mr. Woods, deliberately hired an attractive, sturdy young servant as new blood, specifically because his own wife is aging. Bloom infers that Woods instituted the no-followers rule not for propriety, but to isolate the girl and maintain exclusive sexual access to her for himself.
That is a really dark, cynical assumption. But what makes this scene truly brilliant and frankly profoundly uncomfortable to read is how Joyce merges the physical reality of the butcher shop with Bloom's psychological state.
It's very visceral.
It is. Bloom is literally surrounded by dead, raw animal flesh. He is looking at hanks of sausages and bloody kidneys, and as he stares at the servant girl's hips, he begins to commodify her using the exact same agrarian, mercantile language.
Yeah, he assesses her body and thinks, sound meat there, like a stall-fed heifer.
He is reducing a human being to livestock.
He is evaluating her flanks and her physical sturdiness in the exact same manner a cattle breeder would evaluate an animal destined for the slaughterhouse. It is a stark, unvarnished depiction of the male gaze operating at its most literal and commodifying level.
And this reduction of a woman to prime meat doesn't just show us his voyeurism, it actually triggers a very specific sensory memory of his own economic past.
Right. Looking at her hips transports him back to his time working at the Dublin cattle market.
He remembers standing in the muck, watching the professional breeders slap their heavy palms on a cow's, quote, right-meated hindquarter, and declaring, "There's a prime one." He is mapping the memory of evaluating cattle directly onto the experience of watching this young woman buy her morning sausages.
And this transition leads us into the deeper, more complex waters of Bloom's sexual psychology. Because he isn't merely a passive voyeur.
Here's where it gets really interesting.
Yeah, there's a distinct, undeniable current of masochism that runs through his desires.
Absolutely. The memory of the cattle market fades, and he replaces it with the memory of seeing this exact girl working in the yard back at Eccles Street. He recalls watching her whacking a carpet on the clothesline.
Right.
He is mesmerized by her physical strength and her aggression, he thinks. She does whack it, by George, the way her crooked skirt swings at each whack.
Notice the dynamic of his fantasy here. He does not imagine dominating her or overpowering her. He is excited by her physical power, her labor, her capacity for violence, even if it is just directed at a carpet.
That's a great point.
The text explicitly notes that he holds his newspaper patiently in the shop, quote, bending his senses and his will, his soft subject gaze at rest.
Wow.
He is willfully submitting his gaze, his intellect, and his will to her physical presence. He actively desires to be the subject, the subordinate entity in the dynamic.
And we see that masochism validated when she leaves the shop. She completes her purchase, picks up her sausages, and walks out without giving him a single glance.
Not at all.
She is completely, utterly indifferent to his existence. And Bloom's reaction to being ignored is fascinating. He actually sighs down his nose. The text says, the sting of disregard glowed to weak pleasure within his breast.
He enjoys it.
He enjoys being invisible to her. He finds a strange, perverse comfort in feeling small, insignificant, and rejected in her wake.
It is a defining hallmark of his character. Bloom navigates a world that constantly marginalizes him, but rather than fighting that marginalization with aggression, he internalizes it and eroticizes his own submissiveness. He finds safety in being disregarded.
Wow. But his fantasy about her doesn't end when she walks out the door. He notices a detail about her clothing that sends his mind spinning in another direction.
What does he see?
He sees that she's wearing brown scapulars in tatters, defending her both ways. I think most listeners know that a scapular is a Catholic devotional garment worn over the shoulders, one piece of cloth on the chest, one on the back. It signifies piety and spiritual protection.
It is a profound symbol of spiritual defense. But Bloom, Operating entirely in the realm of the secular and the sexual, completely perverts its meaning.
Of course he does.
He interprets defending her both ways, not as a defense against sin or spiritual harm, but as a literal physical defense of her virginity. He imagines the cloth on her chest and her back protecting her from sexual penetration from either direction.
It's a remarkably crude bodily interpretation of a sacred object. And having established this defense, his mind immediately invents a scenario where that defense is completely overwhelmed. He pictures her walking into the narrow alleyway behind their houses, Eccles Lane, and being seduced and overpowered by an off-duty policeman. He imagines the girl's preference, thinking, they like them sizable.
And the invocation of the policeman is highly specific to the context of 1904 Dublin.
Oh, tell me about that.
The Dublin Metropolitan Police, or the DMP, were a famously imposing force. They were not ordinary men. The absolute minimum height requirement to join the DMP was 5 feet 9 inches, and many were well over 6 feet tall.
Which was huge back then.
Enormous. In a city where the average working-class citizen was often malnourished and stunted by poverty, these policemen were towering, burly giants, often recruited straight from the hardy rural farms. They are the ultimate symbols of physical and state authority.
So Bloom's fantasy pits this massive, towering symbol of authority against the sturdy, vigorous servant girl, and he imagines the dialogue of their encounter. He pictures the girl saying, "Oh, please, Mr. Policeman, I'm lost in the wood."
And this single line of internal dialogue is a phenomenal example of how Joyce's brain, and by extension, Bloom's brain layers cultural references to create meaning.
It is a masterful mashup. First, there is the obvious pun on her employer's name, Mr. Woods. She is lost in Wood's house, trapped in her domestic servitude.
Right.
But the phrase "lost in the wood" draws from two entirely different staples of contemporary popular culture, creating a deeply ironic contrast. The first being the traditional fairy tale, Babes in the Wood.
Which is a dark, terrifying story about innocent children abandoned in a forest to die. It evokes genuine helplessness, vulnerability, and mortal peril.
Exactly. But Bloom undercuts that vulnerability entirely with the second reference. "Oh, please, Mr. Policeman" was the title of a massively popular music hall comedy song from the 1890s, famously performed by an act called the Tilly Sisters.
Right, the music hall song.
The song is not about danger. It is a bawdy-winking comedy about young, seemingly naive country girls who come to the big city of London, pretend to be lost, and feign innocence specifically to flirt with and manipulate the local police. So the chorus is literally the girls asking the policeman to be good to them because they've just arrived in the city.
Precisely. It is a song about the weaponization of innocence. By mashing up the terrifying fairy tale with the bawdy music hall song, Bloom is revealing how he views the girl.
Yeah.
He doesn't actually think she's in danger of being assaulted. He imagines she is playfully, knowingly weaponizing her perceived vulnerability to seduce this massive cop. It's a highly theatrical, consensual fantasy of domination and submission playing out in his head.
Bloom's mind is a relentless sponge. He absorbs high culture, theology, lowbrow comedy, and advertising, and weaves them all together to score his private desires.
He really does.
But the physical reality of the butcher shop eventually forces him back to his own history. We mentioned earlier that looking at the stall-fed heifer reminded him of the cattle market. That memory is incredibly potent and deserves a closer look.
Definitely. The Dublin cattle market was not a minor operation. Established in 1863, it was a sprawling, chaotic complex located just off the North Circular Road in the northwestern quadrant of the city.
Just how big was it?
It was the largest cattle market in Europe. At its peak, it facilitated the buying, selling, and exporting of over 1 million live animals every single year. It was the brutal, beating heart of Ireland's agricultural export economy.
And we learned that Bloom was intimately involved in this world. The timeline of the novel establishes that in 1893 and 1894, a decade prior to this morning walk, Bloom was employed as a clerk at the market, basically superintending cattle sales for a highly prominent and wealthy cattle trader named Joseph Cuff.
It was a respectable, stable position that gave him a front-row seat to the massive flow of capital and livestock through the city.
But it ended in disaster. Bloom was fired. He got into an argument with a wealthy rancher, a grazier. The text notes he gave the man lip, meaning he was opinionated, argumentative, and refused to defer to his social better.
And Joseph Cuff, protecting his business interests, summarily fired Bloom.
And this dismissal remains a festering wound in Bloom's life. It represents a massive loss of economic stability, and it is a point of bitter resentment for his wife, Molly. She is convinced that if Bloom had just kept his mouth shut or let her intervene, he could have been promoted to manager.
Yet despite the humiliation of being fired, Bloom's time at the market proves that he is not just a passive observer of the city, he is a man capable of genuine large-scale systems thinking.
What's fascinating here is how his mind jumps to infrastructure.
Yeah. As he stands in the butcher shop, the memory of the market prompts a very specific civic idea, he thinks. Of course, if they ran a tram line along the North Circular from the cattle market to the Keys, value would go up like a shot.
When I read that line, I thought Bloom is a visionary.
He absolutely is, in terms of infrastructure. You have to understand the madness of the existing system. In 1904, and astonishingly, all the way until the market was finally closed in 1973.
1973? Wow.
The standard method for transporting thousands of massive terrified cattle from the inland market to the shipping docks on the River Liffey was to simply drive them on foot right through the populated streets of Dublin.
That sounds like a stampede waiting to happen.
It was organized chaos. You had drovers marching herds of cattle, sometimes half a mile long, down major thoroughfares. The animals were dodging electric trams, horse-drawn carriages, and pedestrians.
Oh my God.
They were destroying property, terrifying citizens, and leaving massive amounts of hazardous waste in the streets. It was dangerous, intensely unsanitary for the human population, and incredibly cruel to the animals.
And Bloom, looking at this systemic failure, instantly conceives of a modern infrastructural solution. He realizes that if the city simply laid a dedicated railway line along the existing North Circular Road, connecting the market directly to the shipping quays, the entire problem would be solved.
It's brilliant.
The animals could be loaded onto train cars, bypassing the streets entirely. It would be infinitely more humane, vastly improve urban sanitation, and dramatically increase property values along the route. It is a completely brilliant, rational, modern urban planning idea.
It is brilliant, but it also highlights the central tragedy of Bloom's character. He is a visionary without agency.
Right.
He has the intellect to redesign the city's infrastructure, but he is a marginalized lower-middle-class ad canvasser who was fired for talking back to a rancher. He has zero capital, zero political influence, and zero social standing to ever make this tram line a reality.
That is the tension, isn't it? Is he a suppressed genius, or is he just an armchair quarterback? He has all these grand designs for the city, but he can't even hold down a job at the market.
Exactly.
He is full of systemic solutions, but lacks the personal drive or power to execute any of them. The idea just flashes in his mind and dies there.
It is the paralysis of the modern citizen, trapped within systems they can analyze but cannot alter.
So true. And speaking of analyzing systems, Bloom finally completes his transaction. He pays for his kidney. The ferret-eyed butcher, Moses Dlugacz, takes the meat and wraps it up.
Right.
In 1904, there is no plastic packaging. Butchers wrapped meat in whatever was available, which was usually discarded newspaper or promotional flyers. Bloom takes this bloody, oozing pork organ, swaddled in cut sheets of paper, and leaves the shop. As he walks back into the sunlight of Dorset Street, heading home, he unfolds the greasy wrapper and begins to read it.
And this seemingly insignificant piece of trash contains what is arguably the most culturally, politically, and symbolically loaded text in the entire chapter.
The wrapper is an advertisement for a company called Egendathnetium,
which is Hebrew for a company of planters. Though for accuracy, the correct transliteration of the Hebrew would be Agudath. This advertisement represents a very real historical phenomenon in 1904.
It was a real prospectus.
Yes. The document is a formal prospectus, a proposal aiming to raise capital to purchase vast, uncultivated, sandy tracts of land from the Turkish government, which ruled Palestine as part of the Ottoman Empire at the time. The goal is to plant these barren tracts with eucalyptus trees, orange groves, and massive melon fields north of the ancient port city of Jaffa.
When you look at the mechanics of the ad, it reads exactly like a modern real estate crowdfunding pitch. It is appealing directly to European investors.
It is the financial mechanism of early Zionism. The movement, spearheaded by visionaries like Theodor Herzl, recognized that to establish a politically and legally assured home for the Jewish people in Palestine, they first had to acquire the physical earth.
Right.
But buying the land wasn't enough. It had to be cultivated. The planters' companies would purchase the tracts, undertake the grueling physical labor of clearing the sand and planting the groves, and then sell shares of that cultivated land to European Jews to fund further expansion.
Bloom reads the specific economic terms of the pitch. The ad states, quote, "You pay 80 marks, and they plant a dunam of land for you with olives, oranges, almonds, or citrons. Every year, you get a sending of the crop. Your name entered for life as owner in the Book of the Union, can pay 10 down and the balance in yearly installments.
It is a meticulously structured financial product. Let's look at the numbers. 80 German marks in 1904 was roughly equivalent to 4 English pounds. In terms of modern purchasing power, you are looking at an investment of roughly $400.
And what does that buy you?
A dunam. A dunam was a Turkish unit of land measurement equal to roughly 1,000 square meters, which is about 1/4 of an acre. So for $400, a European investor could legally own a 1/4 acre of the promised land.
And it isn't just an abstract investment. The ad promises a physical return, ascending of the crop. The specific crops mentioned are vital, particularly the citrons.
Right, the citron, known in Hebrew as the etrog, it's a large, ancient citrus fruit, an ancestor of the modern lemon. It has a very thick, bumpy rind and a powerful fragrance.
But the ad mentions it not for its culinary value.
No, it's for its religious necessity. The etrog is a mandatory ritualistic component of the Jewish festival of Sukkot, the autumn harvest festival that commemorates the 40 years the Israelites spent wandering in the desert, living in fragile temporary shelters.
The text Bloom reads emphasizes that these citrons must be, quote, without a flaw to be deemed kosher for the ritual. And because of this stringent requirement, perfect specimens fetch incredibly high prices in European markets.
So the advertisement is brilliantly engineered. It appeals to the investor's desire for financial return, but it intertwines that with deep religious piety and the emotional yearning for a physical connection to the ancestral homeland. You aren't just buying land, you are buying the very instruments of your faith.
And the company backs up this emotional and financial appeal with the ultimate endorsement. Bloom sees a name printed on the prospectus: Moses Montefiore.
Ugh. Sir Moses Haym Montefiore was an Anglo-Italian financier of immense wealth who retired from business at the age of 40 to dedicate the rest of his life and fortune entirely to philanthropy and the defense of Jewish rights globally.
He was a big deal.
He was an international icon, a hero to European Jews. Starting in the mid-19th century, Montefiore traveled repeatedly to Palestine and began utilizing his vast wealth to purchase land, establish agricultural settlements, and teach farming skills to Jewish residents so they could become self-sufficient.
Having Montefiore's name associated with your planter's company was like having the Pope endorse your Catholic charity. It conferred absolute moral authority, financial stability, and orthodox sanctity to the enterprise.
Exactly.
Bloom is holding a powerful, persuasive pitch for the creation of a nation. But it is the very last detail on the ad that creates the most profound psychological shift in the chapter. Bloom reads the address of the company headquarters in Germany. It reads, Bleibtreustrasse 34, Berlin, W15.
This is where Joyce's genius for synthesis reaches its peak. Bleibtreustrasse 34 was indeed the actual historical address of the Palestine Land Development Company in Berlin. Joyce didn't invent it.
Wait, really?
Yeah, but he includes it because he recognized the devastating symbolic potential of the translation.
When I was prepping for this deep dive, I looked up the translation of the street name. In German, Bleibtreu literally translates to remain true or stay faithful. And when you combine that imperative command with the numbers in the address, the implications for Bloom's life are just staggering.
Break down the numerology for us.
Okay, the postal code is W15. The number 15 is highly charged for Bloom. His daughter, Millie, just turned 15 years old the day before, and she has recently moved out of the family home to work in a photography shop in Mullingar. She is gone. Then you have the building number, 34. Bloom's wife, Molly, is currently 33 years old, rapidly approaching her 34th birthday. But more importantly, Bloom knows with agonizing, near absolute certainty that Molly is planning to invite her concert manager, Blazes Boylan, into their bed at 4 p.m. this very afternoon.
The subconscious associations are inescapable. The physical document he is holding is demanding fidelity.
Exactly. Let's look at the macro picture here. Bloom is walking home carrying a bloody dead animal organ wrapped in a prospectus for a promised homeland. And the street address of this homeland is screaming at him, "Remain true!" The numbers represent the two women who defined his domestic world, the daughter who has left and the wife who is about to be unfaithful.
It triggers a massive emotional transference.
It really does. Bloom reads the financial pitch and thinks, nothing doing. He rejects the literal premise of the ad. He is not going to send 80 marks to Berlin. He is not going to become a farmer in Jaffa. But he follows that rejection by thinking, still an idea behind it. On the macro political surface, the idea is Zionism securing a safe, physical homeland for marginalized people. But as the translation of Bleibtreu seeps into his mind, the idea shifts from the macro to the micro.
The homeland he is desperately worried about isn't Palestine.
No, it is his own house at 7 Eccles Street. He wants his domestic homeland to be secure. He wants his family to remain true.
Joyce has taken a literal piece of trash, a piece of bloody butcher paper, and transformed it into an incredibly precise map of his protagonist's deepest, most suppressed anxieties regarding his failing marriage and his fracturing family. It is an astonishing feat of psychological realism.
It is breathtaking, and we could spend hours just unpacking the emotional weight of that single wrapper. But before we conclude this deep dive, we have to look at the structural mechanics of how Joyce actually wrote this scene in the butcher shop. Because beyond the dense historical references and the deep psychological profiling, Joyce is doing something revolutionary with the English language itself.
You are referring to the concept of somatic agency, or the autonomy of the body.
Yes. There is a bizarre, highly deliberate grammatical shift that occurs the moment Bloom is handed the meat. In any standard 19th century novel, if a character is given an object, the author writes, "He took the object. The conscious mind is the subject."
Right.
But listen to the exact phrasing Joyce uses when Dlugacz hands over the purchase. His hand accepted the moist, tender gland and slid it into a side pocket.
His hand accepted. The hand is the active subject, not Bloom.
And it continues when it is time to pay. The text reads, "Then it fetched up 3 coins from his trousers pocket and laid them on the rubber prickles." It fetched up the coins. The hand is operating entirely independently of Bloom's conscious self. Bloom is almost relegated to being a passive bystander, watching his own appendages execute a commercial transaction.
This is not just a quirky stylistic flourish or a grammatical error. It is a profound philosophical statement that attacks the core assumptions of Western literature, and Joyce deploys this technique throughout the entirety of Ulysses.
Where else do we see this autonomy operating?
Well, a prime example is in the earlier episode, Proteus. In that chapter, we are situated inside the mind of the young, fiercely intellectual poet, Stephen Dedalus. Stephen is walking on Sandy Mount Strand, completely lost in highly abstract, esoteric, philosophical thoughts about Aristotle and the nature of visual perception.
Okay.
And as he moves blindly across the beach, the text describes his physical movement by stating, "His slow feet walked him riverward."
His feet walked him. He is the grammatical object of his own body parts.
Exactly. The feet are the agents making the navigational decisions while the conscious mind is otherwise occupied. And Joyce pushes this technique to its absolute extreme later in the novel, in the Sirens episode.
Oh, that's the musical one, right?
Yes. That chapter takes place in the bar of the Ormond Hotel and is structurally themed around music and sound. Joyce describes the barmaids flirting with the patrons, but he does so by entirely isolating their body parts from their consciousness. He writes, quote, "Miss Douce's wet lips said, laughing in the sun," or he notes how Lenihan's lips over the counter lisped.
The lips speak, they laugh, they titter, as if they are separate entities completely divorced from the brains attached to them.
Right.
So the question is, why is Joyce fracturing the body this way? What is he trying to communicate about the nature of human experience?
He is dismantling the legacy of René Descartes. In traditional Western philosophy and English prose, there is a rigid mind-body dualism. The conscious I, the ego, the rational dictatorial intellect is the absolute master. I think, therefore I am, and therefore I command my hand to move.
Right. The brain is in charge.
The body is viewed merely as a mechanical meat puppet controlled by the sovereign brain. But Joyce, observing reality, recognized that human experience does not actually function that way. He is stripping away the illusion of the dictatorial rational mind.
Because in reality, so much of our daily existence is entirely automatic. When I was trying to wrap my head around this concept, I thought of it in terms of computer architecture.
Oh, I like that.
It's as if Bloom's conscious mind is the active window on a desktop monitor. It is rendering this high-definition, processor-heavy fantasy of the massive policeman and the servant girl. His intellect is completely consumed by that active application, but his body is just a background operating system script. It's a low-level routine executing the bykidney.exe command without needing any input from the main processor.
That is an excellent metaphor. Often, our bodies act on instinct, immediate sensory desire, or deeply ingrained muscle memory long before our conscious intellect even registers what is happening.
Right.
In the butcher shop, Bloom's mind is miles away, lost in masochistic fantasy and agrarian memory. But his body understands the rote, physical routine of a commercial transaction. It knows the weight of the coins, the feel of the pocket, the geometry of the counter, so the hand simply takes over and executes the task autonomously.
The hand knows what to do. The feet know the way home. It is a universally recognizable experience. Have you ever driven your car to work on your standard commute, and when you pull into the parking lot, you suddenly realize you have absolutely no memory of navigating the last 5 miles.
All the time.
You were entirely lost in thought about a meeting or something, and your hands and your feet successfully drove a 2-ton machine through traffic without your conscious supervision.
It is a mildly terrifying realization of our own automation.
It really is. But Joyce is capturing that exact psychological reality. He is fracturing the unified, monolithic self of 19th century literature into a messy, realistic chorus of independent, autonomous drives, reflexes, and background processes. It is a radically honest, scientifically accurate way of portraying how human consciousness actually navigates the physical world.
He forces the reader to acknowledge that we are not always the captains of our own ships. Sometimes we are just passengers in a vessel steered by habit and muscle memory.
And with that profound realization, Bloom steps out of the butcher shop. The bloody pork kidney is safely tucked in his pocket, the map of a new homeland is clutched in his hand, and he heads back out into the morning sun of Dorset Street, walking back toward a home that is quietly falling apart.
Such a powerful image.
It is. So to quickly recap the incredible density of this single morning walk in just a few pages of text, we have traveled from the physics of light and the Orientalist fantasies of the East, navigated the cutthroat sectarian economics of the Dublin pub trade, and debated the civic potential of a man marginalized by his society.
It covers so much ground.
We plunged into the deep, uncomfortable psychological terrain of commodification and masochistic desire, explored the agonizing fragility of a marriage through the numerology of a discarded advertisement, and finally, we examined how the human body itself operates with a mind of its own.
It is an exhaustingly rich, towering achievement of literary architecture. Every sentence is a trapdoor into a new discipline.
It truly is. So to leave you with a final provocative thought, think about your own morning commute tomorrow. As you walk out your front door, pay close attention to the fracture between your mind and your body. How often do your feet carry you to the coffee shop on pure, eponymous autopilot, while your mind is simultaneously trying to solve a complex logistical problem at work, recalling a random geographical fact from your childhood, and briefly, secretly spinning up a wildly complex fantasy about a stranger walking past you?
It happens more than we admit.
James Joyce wasn't just writing a historical novel about a guy buying a pork kidney in 1904. He was attempting to write the absolute source code for human consciousness. He wanted to document what it actually feels like to be alive inside a human skull. So the next time your hand reaches automatically into your pocket to pull out your phone and check a notification while your brain is supposedly focused on talking to a friend, stop and ask yourself, did you consciously decide to do that, or did your hand?
A great question to end on.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive. Don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe, and leave a comment to support us.